Ireland, tape number 2, Father Louis Hughes. Coming in 3, 2, 1.
What I'm going to talk to you in terms of the Quinn philosophy, where does it come from, is entirely based on basically what Tony Quinn says himself in this newspaper. This is the source of anything I say about the teaching of Tony Quinn. Presumably his own words in his own newspaper. And then against that background, I have the study of Indian yogic philosophy from classics such as Mircea Eliade. This is really the definitive work, I suppose, a single volume on yoga for those who want to get a really good understanding, and some other works. Incidentally, when I was writing this book, Yoga, A Path to God, ? The publisher, that's Mercier Press in Cork, did send me a document to be signed that I was, really did say what I was saying, the text and so on. The legal people went through it, and there were 2.5 pages of legal comments on the chapter on Tony Quinn, and half a page of legal comments on all the other chapters in the book, because of their terrific fears of the organisation should they displease them in some way. So they wanted to be absolutely sure that everything I said could be stood over in court, as it were. But coming away from that, I would also say maybe at the personal level, I would have met a good number of people who have interacted, who have been involved in the Tony Quinn organisation. Some of them would have had painful experiences, but the most recent person I met was a young man, a very successful career in his 30s, who had spent £15,000 on the Educo program. He used to have a house. He didn't have it anymore, but he wasn't concerned about that. He used to have a car, just borrowing an old banger now, but he's not worried about that. And he said it was the best £15,000 he ever spent, and he looked forward to spending £50,000 on, I think it was the executive version of Saying, where you get apparently much more one-to-one with Tony than in the £15,000 program. So just to show the kind of great diversity of experiences that are there. But now I'm going to leave all experience behind now and just go back to theory, so I'm going to bore you for the next 50 minutes or so. There are 3 different elements or aspects that I'm going to look at in this talk. And I'll show a slide at the end of each section. Yes, you can put it on if you wish.
Apologies, didn't see that.
Okay, now that is EX, hex. Unfortunately, this first slide, I printed it out and I was packing things in a hurry and I didn't give it sufficient time to dry, but I think you will be able to read it. Basically, we're going to look here in this first of the 3 sections on the fundamental principle of the Quinn philosophy. Then a second thing we'll look at will be unconscious attention and yogic meditation. And thirdly will be the notion of positive thinking and Christian prayer. So the fundamental principle of Tony Quinn's philosophy, as he says, life, self, energy. Inside each of us is a life source from which emanates life in the form of energy. We refer to it as the self. Equally then, we can say that the purpose of my system is self-expression or self-realization. There you have that. It's life in the form of self-expression, self-realization. For Quinn, life is not some abstract or remote philosophical entity. It is alive and active and can be directly experienced by each individual person within himself or herself. Yes, you can actually feel what is sometimes referred to as the life force. With this comes a delightful discovery, the happiness, even to euphoria, that comes when life is being freely expressed within you. Now, life, self, energy is always seen as a benign force, acts in our best interest. As he says himself, the self takes care of us and keeps us in perfect health. Now, the purpose of human life is to give birth to this self. Somehow the other, this self which is within me, which I can become aware of if I practice certain techniques and practices which he offers. I can become aware of it. All we have to do, it's as simple as this, all you have to do is be still. Anybody who has the courage to put what is being said to the test can become aware for themselves of their true nature, life, self. Okay, that'll be the second point that I would make there. People can become aware for themselves of their true nature, life, self. And it doesn't involve any sophisticated techniques, it's as simple as relaxing and letting it happen. Please note, everything I'm presenting here as Quinn's philosophy, I'm presenting it as he offers it himself. I've studied about 32 issues of this newspaper. It's going over a period of 10 or 12 years. This is how he sees it, and of course you may challenge it if you will, but this is how he presents it anyway. Relaxing into life, allowing it to flow through them unhindered. That's all that's involved. And then what happens is all kinds of benefits arise in terms of health, in terms of success, in terms of money. Health, Quinn believes that most illnesses are caused by people not allowing the life energy to flow through them. It's natural for us to be healthy. If we're not healthy, well, that's because your mental attitude is wrong, you're blocking the natural life force, the natural energy from passing through you. It seemed that the struggles and strivings of the patient somehow impeded or blocked the flow of curative power. You don't need to go to the doctor, you don't need to go to the hospital, just get that energy flowing and all will be well. However, on the other hand, he tells us, when we stop struggling, what we want is done for us. Oh, it all happens. It takes care of us. You've got this principle, life, self, energy, which he refers to as an it. It takes care of us. It takes care of us. That's a strange idea in a sense, how an it can take care of you. Relaxing, letting go is the key. In working with those who come to him for healing, the first thing he does is relax all effort on the part of the patient. The tremendous emphasis here on relaxing, becoming passive. Don't seek to be in control with your ego of what's going on. And of course, a sub-theme here we could bear in mind is, if I relax and let go and stop being in control of what's happening within me, means I'm open for somebody or something else to take over control, but that's not stated here. Relax all effort on the part of the patient, mainly mental, stress, tension, worries, problems, complexes, etc. This allows their self-healing force, life force, self-normalizing energy, whatever we call it, to work unhindered and allows the real person to emerge. Okay, that would be in terms of healing, but it doesn't limit itself only to healing. It will extend to mundane realities like money, career, examination success, and so on. And in order to have this self-improvement, as he calls it, all you have to do is hold the successful outcome in your mind. For example, say you wanted a sum of money. You would merely then, in that non-resistant state, hold the idea of the sum of money and it will come about. And just relax physically, mentally, focus on the crock of gold, the life of your dreams, the money, the career success, whatever, and it will come about. Now these benefits can take place not just in our own life. In other words, we can use this particular energy, this particular force, in order to help other people to achieve good results. For example, if you want to help somebody, what you do is, again, you relax. You want to help your brother, your sister, your mother, your friend, and in that relaxed state, hold thoughts of healing or life improvement or job improvement for the person, and just allow life to flow through you to them unhindered. And that's whether they're present or absent. He says, I maintain that it is possible to sit on your own in a room, and if you take a picture or letter from a person that you have never met, and then let life flow from you unhindered to that person, then you will obtain benefit. In dealing with a therapist, if you're going to a Tony Quinn therapist, for example, the person needs simply write down clearly what he or she wants out of life, hand the request to the therapist to work on for them, and relax, and it will happen. And all of this has been developed on a large scale by Tony Quinn through what are called the postal requests. And any of you who've looked at any of these newspapers, you find the section on postal requests is very big. The first time I read these postal requests of Tony Quinn's, sometime the end of the 1980s, I opened the Tony Quinn section. I read about people being cured from diseases, getting exam success, getting something right in the family, getting a job or whatever. And then I opened the St. Martin magazine. Some of you, those of you with grey hairs like myself, will be familiar with the St. Martin magazine, a very, very popular religious magazine published by the Dominicans. And I remember I was giving a talk to religion teachers, and I sort of read out a number of these to them without identifying Tony Quinn or St. Martin. And you know, they could not distinguish between the two sets of letters. That was interesting. However, the postal request costs you, how much? It used to be £25, it is more now. You don't have to pay anything to send your request into St. Martin. We offer a cut price. Okay, all of that is kind of sounds beautiful, as we heard from Dr. Sean Collins' talk. You know, people, there's a tendency in us, the difficulties of life, the light and shade. If somebody can offer me a nice, neat solution, that all will be bright, all will be wonderful, you just have the life of your dreams and live happily ever after, then naturally I would be tempted to go for it, if it could be so. Now, I'll just pause here. That's basically my own very crude, primitive, simplified presentation of the basic Quinn philosophy centered on the self, our life, our energy. And now I want to just, you know, the title of this section was called The Quinn Philosophy. Where does it come from? Because those of you with any familiarity with Indian philosophy, Indian religion, or Hinduism will note some sort of similarity between what we've been talking about and a very fundamental principle in Vedantic Hindu philosophy. Now, I have that there. I'm just jumping from here now to fundamentals of Vedantic Hinduism. And again, apologies for the quality of the print there for the reason explained. Vedantic Hinduism is the main, not the exclusive. There are a number of philosophical, religious, spiritual traditions within Hinduism, loads and loads of them. But the dominant philosophy would be Vedanta, which would be based on the principle that, you know, the true nature of the person is Atman or self. That is to say, this is a philosophy which has emerged not from intellectual analysis, but from a profound spiritual meditation experience over thousands of years, going back probably to 700 or 800 years before the time of Christ, where you have these rishis in the Himalayas and elsewhere in deep, deep meditation, where meditating on their own self came to some extraordinary sense of who they really are. This is after many years and much arduous practice and penance and so on, that thou art, that is what you are deep down, you are this self. And then they went on to the conclusion, based on experience, they would tell us that that self, that Atman, that number 2 there, that Atman, or self, is identified completely with Brahman. Now Brahman, I put it in brackets there, as God. It's not exactly God as we understand it. It would be the principle of the universe, God and the universe as one single entity, so to speak. I don't want to spend too much time in the subtleties of this, but Atman identified with Brahman. In other words, what they concluded was, in 2 stages, that this self that I truly am deep down is identical with the very spirit, self with a capital S, that animates the entire cosmos, that is Brahman. Now, you might say, well, what kind of judgment can I make on that insight? Now, looking at from just looking at Hinduism on its own, there is no doubt, if you practice meditation and you focus on who I am, beyond my body, my feelings, my mind, my history, all my achievements and so on, get beyond to who I am, beyond all of those things, beyond everything that can be put into words or conceived and so on. You may very well, and indeed I know this myself, come to an extraordinary sense of the wonder of the human person that you are. And I would have a hypothesis here that it may well be that in their meditative experience, these rishis had such an extraordinary sense of the beauty and wonder and mystery of the human being that they said, this is divine, this is God. God is not different from this entity that I'm experiencing myself to be at the deepest level. Now, I stress that is not a scholarly judgment. It doesn't have any authority from my own church or any other. It's just a theory that I have myself. But you can leave that aside. This is what they believe. Atman identified Brahman. So really, once you do that, the self, life, the cosmic energy is all there, and it is not different from your very self. So for both Quinn and Vedanta, the true nature of the person is self. When Quinn says self-life energy. In Vedanta, self-identified with Brahman, which we say the creator God, identified with the whole universe. However, there is a difference here. Quinn's concept of the self, I think, is much less subtle than that which you find in the ancient Hindu writings. And I quote here from one book on yoga by Tom MacArthur. The Atman within Hinduism, within Vedantic Hinduism, is an abstraction, an essence tied to the thought, or more properly the mystical vision, that there is a base or ground or substratum to the universe that is beyond words to describe. In other words, this mysterious spirit, Atman, self, you cannot grasp it in a thought, you cannot touch it at the emotional level, you cannot have a physical awareness of it. It is beyond all our concepts, all our capacities to apprehend. But even the human person, if it was a fact that I could have a concept, a thought of my own personal self, that would imply that my own personal self was within the capacity of my mind to comprehend, was somehow less than my mind, which would be a contradiction in terms, wouldn't it? My true self, my true being, has to be beyond what one of my faculties can encompass. And hence, you may get this wonderful sense of your own being that is beyond any philosophy or theology or thought or name or word. Okay. So, another point to make, Quinn says, the purpose of my system is self-expression or self-realization. Now, when you hear that term, self-expression, self-realization, what do you think of? Does it mean sort of you realize your own talents, you develop as a person, you become more effective, you become more integrated? Is that what, would you suggest to you something like that?
Yeah.
But in fact, self-realization is a term that's used within Vedantic Hinduism as well, but with a completely different sense. We need to be very clear on terminology here. Within Vedantic Hinduism, self-realization, for example, some of you will have heard or be familiar with the Self-Realization Fellowship of Yogananda. The Self-Realization Fellowship is Hindu yogic guru who came from India to California in the 1920s and set up one of the forerunners of the new religious movements of Indian background that have flourished in the West in recent times. Self-Realization Fellowship, meaning this is where we practice spirituality together with a view to achieving or attaining to self-realization. What is self-realization? Within Vedantic Hinduism, self-realization means mystically experiencing one's identity as being not different from Atman, the self, and Brahma, the supreme being. In other words, if this is the theology, the nature of the person is self, number one. This self, or Atman, is identified completely with Brahman, God, the universe. Atman is beyond perception, word, image, or thought. We're not talking about the techniques, the mechanisms, the practices whereby I as an individual would be enabled to enter into this mystery and to experience it spiritually. And when that happens, I have become a realized person, or I've achieved self-realization. Advaita is the Sanskrit term for that. Advaita would be, see, there's two words, Advaita, there you have it, and Dvaita. Dvaita means duality or dualism. Advaita, non-dualism, non-duality. In other words, not the experience of there being no differentiation, there is nothing that is not me. Experiencing one's identity with Atma, Brahma, with all that is. Now that is the end of part one, and we'll just move on to part two. What time is this talk finishing at, Mike?
At
1:30. Okay. Right. Unconscious attention and yogic meditation. Okay. I say just have the slide ready, but don't switch it on yet, please. Now, the best we can do about this is, you're all familiar with this gentleman. Scored a goal in Lansdowne Road last Saturday. No relation, Niall Quinn. And this gentleman, I think he's been mentioned already this morning, Steve Collins, world champion boxer. Tony Quinn has established alliances with some very prominent personalities, particularly sporting personalities, which have enabled him to publicize very widely his principle of unconscious attention and what it does for you. Niall Quinn, Irish international soccer striker. He suffered a very bad knee injury in 1994, what do you call it? Cruciate ligaments, yeah, that was, yes. So it's some major surgery and takes a long time for them to recover and get back to full match fitness. According to this magazine, he believes that the practice of unconscious attention helped him not just to recover fully, but to become 20% fitter than he had been before being injured. Now, I haven't been able to check with Niall Quinn himself if this is the case, but this is what Tony Quinn says anyway. And he's quoted in the paper. If you can believe that things are happening in your body, believe in your strength, then you can be 20% or 25% better. Steve Collins engaged Tony Quinn as a mental coach in the build-up to his successful world bout with Chris Eubank in 1995. As Steve Collins puts it, well, as quoted by Tony Quinn, Tony worked with me to get this certainty into the very deepest part of my mind. This didn't only help him to win the fight, he claims that during the fight it enabled him to control pain, fatigue and even bleeding. As a result, he said that his body had fully recovered from the effects of the fight within 45 minutes instead of the usual 2 to 3 weeks. Mighty. So what is this extraordinary thing called unconscious attention? We have the slide, please, Basil. First line, first section. Okay.
Cover the rest?
Unconscious. Yeah.
Do you want me to cover the rest?
Somehow. Yeah, okay, great. That's Tony Quinn there, where you are focused, so absorbed with what is taking place that your entire attention is taken up with it, and no part of you is left over to be consciously aware that you are paying attention. Yeah, I think we perhaps all have some experience of this. The way young children can become so focused on something, absorbed in their favorite TV program, whatever, that the rest of the world just doesn't exist. Or very spiritual people, very prayerful people, that they're so absorbed in prayer that they don't no sense of anything else. The only thing that is real is what's there. The attention is you're so focused. What is taking place that your entire attention is taken up with it. No part of your attention, of your awareness is left over to be consciously aware that you are paying attention. I was with a group of young people at prayer, adults, 20s, quite recently, and I had this extraordinary sense that they were so absorbed in the prayer that, if I put a pin in them, they wouldn't have noticed it. It was that kind of that level of attention. Well, this is something we'd be all familiar with, but Tony Quinn has made a big, would claim to have made a science or a whole methodology around it. In the most dramatic illustration of the technique of unconscious attention, Quinn had 4 patients undergo surgery without an anesthetic. Now that's described again in this issue in 1995. Okay, it's probably simpler just to quote my notes than from the paper itself. The results, as reported, seem extraordinary. Not only were the patients free from pain during the surgery, they seem to have enjoyed the operations. Comments from the patients. From the moment it began, an amazing feeling of well-being and relaxation came over me. I'm relaxed when you hear that. And then another, it was just a beautiful feeling because you really felt so complete. It was a bit disappointing when the operation was over. At that point, I was in a state of very deep relaxation and I just didn't want to come out of it. Now, subsequently I was told that the 4 patients in this particular study were actually long-term members of Tony Quinn's movement. They weren't 4 average Johnny or Mary in from the street kind of thing. And I think there probably had been some questioning of that particular report. But as I say, I'm presenting it as Tony Quinn himself does. Unconscious attention. You could come down the slide a bit, scroll down there a bit now, Basil. Okay, you can come down a few more forward. Yeah, okay. There you have the summary of it there. It claimed to lead to greater fitness, controlled pain, fatigue, bleeding, quicker recovery from injury, undergo surgery without an anesthetic. Now, Tony Quinn's conscious attention is not a recent discovery. As a concept. I remember this is a book on yoga which I've had now for about 20 years. Ernest Wood was actually a member of the Theosophy movement. He lived towards the end of the 19th century and died about 1960 something, I think. But he's written quite a lot on yoga and studied it and so on. And so I'm just going to comment a little bit with the full slide, please, Basil. What you have there is a summary of one particular, a different tradition now within Indian religion, the Patanjali yoga system. Patanjali was a figure, we don't know exactly when he lived, but whereas Indian scholars tend to place him AD, a yoga system based on these 8 stages that you'll be familiar with, some of them anyway. I should point out that Patanjali didn't create this system from scratch. Patanjali was summarizing this whole tradition that had been evolving for centuries before his own time. Most of these 8 stages were well known some centuries before Patanjali's time. But in the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, very short work, about 160 short statements, that's all there's to it really, but they have been extensively commented on by various Hindu scholars in subsequent centuries. Now just looking at them very briefly there, because the first 2, abstention and observance, yama niyama. Abstentions would be basically various moral rules and social rules. Observance is a more social dimension. Now, where Westerners tend to get involved or interested in yoga would come under number 3, posture, asana, the yoga postures. Okay. According to Patanjali, you're not supposed to practice yoga unless you have worked on your moral life and you're honest, clean living, socially responsible, prayerful, and so on. Then posture, and then breathing, breath control, pranayama, and then he moves on to I have made it, I'm sorry, again in the haste here, I have made a typing error here. Number 6 comes before number 5. Sorry, number 6 should be number 5. Sense withdrawal is number 5. Pratyahara, withdrawing the senses, turning the senses inward from the external world. My apologies for that. That is number 5, sense withdrawal, pratyahara. Just as the tortoise, when frightened, withdraws 4 legs and a head, the 5 limbs, into the shell, so also can the person withdraw in meditation the 5 external senses and create an inner scene. And that's preparing the way then for the 3 final stages of the process, which are number 6, that should be 6, concentration, dharana, concentration, focusing on one point, being able to keep the mind steady on one point, on a word, on an object, whatever. Then 7, meditation, dhyana. Meditation means where one is completely engaging with the object and one is processing the object and the meditator are becoming one. The knower and the known are becoming as one. And then finally, the final stage, which is samadhi in Sanskrit, variously translated as stasis, ecstasy, contemplation. That's the final stage. That's what we're interested in now. That is very, very advanced and very deep and very, very profound. But nonetheless, in terms of the language that Ernest Wood, for example, uses to describe this particular situation, there are some things in common. So we can roll the whole thing now down, Leslie. Okay. Maybe if we could see both his and Quinn's together, yeah. The whole one, yeah, oh yeah, that's it. Is there, yeah, the top one, can you get this one in? Yeah, we can get the 2. So we can compare them, you know, if it's possible. Okay, that's grand. Ernest Wood, the act of concentration, this is talking about samadhi now within the yogic tradition of Patanjali. The act of concentration, there it is still there while the meditation is going on, though it has been forgotten. Okay, in other words, I forget the fact that I'm concentrating. One forgets oneself, is taken out of oneself, and yet is intensely conscious. Can you see the similarity between what you have down there, Ernest Wood, and what you have up here as a description of unconscious attention? It is a natural phenomenon, but it is something that can be developed and has been very extensively and seriously developed within this yogic tradition of Patanjali in India. And we find it very extensively developed in Tony Quinn at the present time. Now, as far as I know, I don't believe Tony Quinn has ever been to India. I have no evidence to say that he got this from here. I just don't know. I simply note the obvious and evident similarity between the two. Perhaps some people here might have more information on it. If so, we certainly will be glad to hear later on. That is unconscious attention and the Indian yogic tradition. And that's the end of part 2. We move on to the final part. Positive thinking and Christian prayer. Okay. In one of the issues of Blueprint, Tony says this. Here I'm talking about Tony Quinn, Mr. Quinn, Dr. Quinn. If this healing, life improvement, job improvement seems strange to you, maybe it won't if we sum it up in one word: prayer. Now he speaks about how he arrived at this insight. I came to a part of the Gospels, this is when he was a young boy. I came to a part of the Gospels where Jesus said, if you want something, believe that you have it without any inner doubt, and I give you my word that it will come about. I felt here was a formula for living given to us by Jesus himself. A formula for successful living that is the only formula known beyond doubt to have worked miracles and to be guaranteed by Jesus. I was fascinated and decided there and then that would be my formula for living. He uses the word faith, and he puts the word in block capitals to describe this attitude of mind and heart. Now that is how Tony Quinn presents that, but I believe, we cannot let that identification of prayer and positive thinking, Tony Quinn's positive thinking or positive thinking in any other New Age tradition, pass without some comment. I couldn't find in any of the Gospels the exact text to which Quinn referred.
That's chapter 11, verse 14.
That's not the text that Quinn uses. We're going to come to that now. We're going to look at Mark 11. But that is not what Quinn says, and you'll see the difference. Jumping ahead here. Somebody told me that it might have been inspired by the Aquarian Gospel of Jesus Christ. I went through that as well. This is the Aquarian Gospel of Jesus Christ. It's not a fifth Gospel. It was written in the beginning of the 20th century and is much referred to in New Age circles with greater authority than any of the four Gospels that can be traced back, manuscripts back to the 2nd century in some cases. But the closest, there are a number of different texts that vaguely resemble this statement of Tony Quinn's, vaguely resemble them, that can be looked at. We can have the if you want to track any of these yourself, I'll just give you references. You could take Matthew 21:22, Matthew 9:29, Mark 9:23, and the most important one, the one that most closely resembles it and the one that we look at, Mark 11:24. When you pray and ask for something, believe that you have received it, and you will be given whatever you ask for. So you note there for the past, when you pray and ask for something, what Quinn says, if you want something, is wanting something and praying for something the same thing? This is the text of Mark 11:22-25. First of all, have faith in God. I assure you that whoever tells this hill to get up and throw itself in the sea and does not doubt in his heart, but believes that what he says will happen, it will be done for him. For this reason I tell you, when you pray and ask for something, believe that you have received it, and you will be given whatever you ask for. And when you stand and pray, forgive anything you may have against anyone, so that your Father in heaven will forgive the wrongs you have done.
Now, what I've set up there is a comparison between Tony Quinn, a text that I have read, and similar texts elsewhere, and Christian prayer as represented, particularly in that text from Mark 11. And I want to draw your attention to a number of factors there. First of all, Christian prayer is always in relation to God, a personal God, and to his kingdom. And indeed a passage referred to starts off, have faith in God. God is a personal God. And again, it shows what happens when you take a single verse or a few verses out of context. I mean, it'll be evident from the whole reading of the Gospel of Mark and other New Testament texts that God, Jesus, intensely personal. Jesus is Lord. Personal God. On the other hand, where does God come into the Tony Quinn system? The highest principle is life, self, energy, and this is impersonal. It's not a person. This life, self, energy in Tony Quinn, nowhere does it come across that he's thinking of a personal God. And indeed, he refers to life, self, energy with the pronoun it, not he or she, but it. So it's an impersonal principle. It's not a person, and that again would be consistent with the Vedantic Hindu tradition, where we have the Atma. But I would want to point this out, it's a very interesting point, that where you would have great figures within Indian history like Gandhi, Tagore, the great poet and writer, Sri Aurobindo, great Hindus, say, of the 19th and 20th century, who accepted this Vedantic philosophy. Nonetheless, they somehow, in a way that I couldn't work out the consistency of it, the ambivalence is there, that they still prayed to a personal God. You have the famous last word of Gandhi when he was assassinated, "Hey Ram, oh God." You saw it in the movie when he was shot. He called on God and he died. So they did pray to a personal God, but there's no evidence of that in Tony Quinn. The center of the word is not God, the center of the word is me. The second point I would make is that, before you that the emphasis in the gospel passages on faith, being faithful to God. I would differentiate between faithful living, which the gospel requires, and successful living, which is what Tony Quinn's philosophy is all about. The Blueprint for Living was the name of the paper that he published throughout the 80s, but somewhere in the 90s it became Blueprint for Successful Living, just to emphasize that success is what it's about. And somebody will be familiar with that famous quotation of Mother Teresa about what God asks of us. God does not ask us to be successful, he asks us to be faithful. And that's very, very true. Now, another point of differentiation, the magician that Tony Quinn refers to. Jesus was the greatest real live magician of all. Magic and mysticism would be contrasted on the basis that magic is about gaining power, gaining spiritual power over the elements, perhaps over other people. It's about power from me over what's out there. Mysticism, on the other hand, is an experience of transcendence, of something that is higher, greater, deeper, beyond me. And indeed, a principle, a being to whom I surrender myself. Now that's mysticism, whether we're talking about Christian mysticism, Hindu mysticism, Islamic mysticism. In any religious or spiritual tradition, mysticism is about surrendering to a higher power. I am not the center. This overwhelming mystery of God is where the center of all life and being is to be found. So notice it's the contrast between magic and mystic is the contrast between power and prayer. Prayer is about submission, first of all. When I go to ask something from God, I ask with a certain humility, recognizing that it is God I am asking. There was a very interesting Late Late Show, sometime in the 1980s. And on the Late Late Show with Gay Byrne was Tony Quinn and the violinist Yehudi Menuhin, who was Jewish. And Tony Quinn was talking about this very business of, whatever you want, believe that you have it and it will be yours. And Yehudi Menuhin made a very interesting comment. He said, yes, of course, but we must ask with a certain humility. Humility was the word that he used. And it was so correct. And of course, Yehudi Menuhin coming out in the Jewish tradition. We must pray to God with a certain humility. God only knows what is good for me. And therefore, if I ask for certain things, I may not get what I ask for. And sometimes I will, sometimes I won't. But if I don't get what I pray for, it doesn't mean my prayer is wasted. The prayer will change me, and I will be brought maybe to a new point of wisdom where I come to see, well, actually, maybe I'm just as well without that thing I was looking for. Maybe that £1 million wouldn't have been all that good for me. That illustration of Dr. Collins about the increasing line of wealth. Maybe it would be better if it wasn't cut at that point. Even if it was taken from me. Not only that I would choose not to look for more money, but that something would happen that some of the money was taken from me. Might be no harm at all. And then finally, there is the question of reconciliation. You have it there. When you stand and pray, forgive anything you may have against anyone, so that your Father in heaven will forgive the wrongs you have done. So a willingness to be reconciled with all people is crucial, is essential within Christian prayer and spirituality. There's no getting away from this. But within the Quinn philosophy, I don't see any reference to that. Just belief simply means self-belief, believing in me and in this life self-energy, which is my true nature. Now, you'd be delighted to, just concluding remarks. You can switch that off. The Quinn philosophy, where does it come from? Is it Hindu? Well, we cannot say that it's a Hindu philosophy, because Hindu spirituality is very much focused on escaping from this body, from this earthly life, the spirit being liberated from matter. And in other words, I can only really have complete Advaita self-realization when I leave this body behind and escape from the successive cycles of reincarnation. In other words, Hinduism and spirituality tends to be very otherworldly, whereas Quinn's philosophy is this world. It's so much focused on money, career, success, beautiful body, strong body, and so on. There's marvelous figures and illustrations in these newspapers about big bikini-clad figures and Charles Atlas type people. So it's not Hindu. And it's not Christian because it's not centered on a loving God and on Jesus, but rather it's centered on the impersonal it principle, self-life energy. So what is it? Taking the notion that this newspaper only publishes good news, anything negative or bad must not be allowed to come in. And here it's perhaps appropriate to mention that this conference, we're Dialogue Ireland, this organisation. Last year we had a dialogue with evangelical Christians. I think it was a very fruitful dialogue, and Father Pat represented the mainline church positions, and we had representatives from the small evangelical groups who are outside the mainline churches. we repeatedly contacted the Quinn organisation, inviting them to dialogue with us on the issues of difficulty that many people are reporting as a result of their interaction with that group, with that organisation. And consistently, the answer was no. Right up to a very late date, we kept the place open that their representatives could speak on an equal basis with ours to tease through these difficulties. But again, I think probably what we were doing was one great cloud of negativity, the dark side that should not be looked at. Only good news, to acknowledge shadow side is to introduce negativity. Now that's the mortal sin in New Age philosophy. What I would say is the techniques that Tony Quinn uses many of them are derived from the Indian yogic tradition, together with some other Eastern practices such as ki massage and alternative healings from China and India particularly. But the philosophy, where does the Tony Quinn philosophy come from? I think it's essentially a belief in the power of positive thinking, which is not confined to the Quinn philosophy alone, but which is found in many other groups, individuals and movements in this city, in this country and throughout the West today. Thank you.